Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me, and I am joined today by my dear friend SQ McGrath. Hello, how are we?
We are good.
Oh my gosh, we have been trying to get this thing together for so long. I've had to defer a week. You're like one of the most fun people for me to interact with on Instagram. I love your reels. I love your books. I'm reading Kitty right now. I've got so much to talk about.
Well, thank you.
So, how are you doing? Good?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah,
Yeah.
doing well. And you're too kind about my Instagram reels. They're not that great, but
Oh, they're great. I think they're fun. I don't know what filter you're going to use next. That's probably
oh
suspense
yes,
point number one.
I do love the filters.
And I love your takes. You get on there and you talk about things that are inspiring you or that you've recently thought of or observed in the writing and reading community. And I love that because as a fellow self-pubbed author, I love to get the perspective of someone else who's also doing the thing and reads a lot of indie like I do. And your takes are always great for me because you're a teacher.
hmm
And what is it that you teach?
So I've been teaching high school ELA for the past 17 years, and before that, it was middle school ELA. And yeah, so mostly 10th grade. That's kind of my sweet spot, 15, 16-year olds. I love that age. And actually, I'm very excited because this year I'll also be teaching creative writing. So I'm super
Nice.
excited about that. Yeah, I can't
Well,
wait.
and you're fantastic at what you do with your books. I'm always a little leery when I hear someone say, "I I write in relative like silence, right, cut off from the rest of the world," and doesn't that doesn't necessarily need a lot of the resources someone like I did. I need a dev editor. I need a proofreader. I need these people because if not, what the world would find in my writing would not be what they see today, right? And your stuff is so clean and so well written, and I love that you're able to do that
Mhm.
because of your background. I think it's really unique that you have that capability.
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, when I first started writing, I'm sure I was terrible, but yeah, 20 years of teaching grammar and editing and proofing will kind of do that to you. So
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time looking at student writing and then applying that to my own work. So yeah,
Right.
I'm kind of blessed in a way that my job has enabled me to do my own proofing and editing and all of that. So yeah, it's very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and it's fantastic. So I was
Well,
like,
thank you.
because I knew that before I started reading Kitty, and I was thinking, oh gosh, please let this thing be clean because I would feel terrible if it wasn't, because then it's like, okay, how do I? Some people are sensitive about hearing about their own writing, and I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, like this is so clean. I can tell you've really spent a lot of time editing and proofing your own work, and that's really hard to do. So
Yeah, and actually, if you do find a mistake, tell me because I get super angry at myself. Like if there's something in there, I want to know. Call me, tell me. I mean, definitely anybody. I'm always like, tell me. I will not be, angry at you. In fact, I'll be angry at myself, and I will fix it right away. So I'm my hardest critic for sure. So tell
I
me.
love that. I mean, I was reading I was reading a traditionally published book last year, and I was finding mistake after mistake after mistake. And that's not a hit on trad publishers or a boost in self-publishing. I mean, every writer, no matter what your publishing route is, has the opportunity to have that experience. But I was kind of surprised. I think I was more surprised that I was finding that in a trad published book because I know what the resources they're putting into those things and the cost of those resources. And so I was a little surprised to see that. So I guess I'm saying this to say you've done a much cleaner job than some of the trad published work I've read in the last year. So that's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
So, so
Here.
I think part of that is just because of your extensive backlog. I mean, you've written a lot. You've released a lot of work. I think you had said it was what, 26 books at this point?
Yeah, so I just finished my 26th novel 2
Wow.
days ago. Well, I finished the actual text. It needs editing, but yes. So
Wow.
yeah, and I can't promise those are all well-written books, but yeah. So
And
I mean,
that's
early stuff I wouldn't share
right.
with anyone, but yeah.
Right. Now that's strings, right? And that's going to be out in August?
Yes, my goal is to spend July editing and then yeah, get it out there on Amazon and my website in August. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. And what's kind of the premise behind Strings? Is there like a, I don't want to do spoilers or anything. I mean, everyone's got to get out there and pick it up and read it for themselves. But what's kind of the genesis of Strings? What inspired you to write it, and like what are we in for?
Yeah, inspiration is such a weird thing all the time because I always feel like I start with this little grain of something that interests me and then just kind of see where it goes. So maybe you've heard about plotters versus pantsers,
Hmm.
and I am not a plotter by any means. So with strings, maybe you can draw this conclusion, but it's puppets, marionettes.
Right.
I've always loved the idea of, puppet shows and things like that. So horror, puppets, they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to do something with that. And that's really the only idea I had. And I thought, okay, well, got to do something. So anyway, I started with that very vague notion. And then I needed some characters. I'm like, great, I'm going to have some characters. They're going to go to the beach because Seaside Carnival Beach kind of just started building from there. And it's a family that then is going to have some issues. And then with the carnival idea, some freak show, sideshow stuff started working its way into that. So it became this monstrous thing that now I have to rein in a little bit. But yeah, so as far as what is it about? Well, a family that's having some issues, thinking they're going to go to the beach and it's going to be a nice vacation. They're going to get a little closer knit, but that actually is the opposite of what happens. There's some things that are going to become problematic. And at the same time, you've got these strange figures showing up. And, as far as the horror goes, it's more surreal than anything else. The horror is more bizarre.
Mm.
It's not gory. There is a little gore in there, but it's more nightmarish, which is what I was aiming for. Is this a dream or is this a nightmare? Where exactly are we going? Like, we're eating ice cream cones, but then there's a dead whale over there. And are we eating the dead whale or the ice cream? Like, what's happening? So it's, yes, that's actually a scene. So anyway,
Nice.
it's more bizarre than anything else. I wanted to push myself a little bit because I hadn't done anything surreal. So that's all I'll say about that. Now, as far as the
Nice.
actual twists and turns, that's where I have to go back in and weave
Mm.
the story together. But I'm proud of what it is so far. We'll see.
Now, so it sounds like you kind of lean into the freedom of pantsing, obviously, and that's something you do from story to story. That's
Mhm.
that's your jam, right?
It is. I don't know if it's always been that way, but definitely with my horror novels, I I don't ever know what's going to happen. And I think that's my favorite part about writing is that I don't know the story either. And I feel like I'm discovering it as I write it.
I
And
love that.
yeah, so
See, I have to use plotting to. It's funny because I didn't think about it too much when I first started writing, and I was like, what makes me faster? Because I can pants or I can plot, and
mhm.
plotting made it so that I was a little bit more confident when I started writing, and I could move a little quicker. But I can't plot to the point where, or I won't plot to the point where I feel constrained. I like the freedom of in the moment writing what is supposed to happen based on the revelation you have while you're crafting story versus, well, no, I can't do that because the plot says, now if I'm going to have like a major shift in the story because of this, I will take a moment to stop and go, wait, what am I getting ready to do?
Mhm.
But I do love that you're able to jump right in there and feel comfortable in that environment because I know some writers don't necessarily feel that. I wouldn't get the sense of that reading your work. It's very structured. It's very well. I mean, we were just talking about Kitty a little bit before we came on. Which did you? I think you released that in 23, right?
Last
Or might
year
have been-
sometime.
Okay.
Maybe last summer. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a cast of characters. There are multiple time periods. There's like a lot going on there.
Mhm.
For you to be able to do that in almost a strictly pantsing format, I would have loved to have seen that first draft. That must have been a blast.
No, you wouldn't have. No.
That would have been pretty cool. So one of the themes that I've gathered from having conversation with you and then diving into some of your work is this you kind of lean into a little bit of the world as like a teacher, right? You do have a lot of teenage characters in your books, but you're not writing exclusively, or you're not writing YA in this case, right?
Right, right. Right. So actually, my writing journey, I feel like I've gone up a hill. So when I first started writing 20 years ago, I wrote exclusively middle grade for like fifth, sixth grade. And
Wow.
then as I got older, I started writing young adult. And then now I write really pretty much, I mean, I call it adult fiction. A lot of the material in there is 18 and up. I wouldn't want my teenager reading some of the stuff I write, you know? But I always have teenagers in my stories. I mean, I love teenagers. I work around them. I've been working around them over half of my life. And there's something about the adolescent mindset that is so malleable. We all remember our teenage years for better or worse, and just how formative they were for us, the marks they left on us. So I just love that age. And I hated high school. I hated adolescence. It was terrible, but it formed me so much. I mean, so much of it
Yeah.
I has marked me deeply.
Mhm.
So I always have teenagers in my books as main characters. And I would love to sort of be a bridge between young adult and adult fiction. Um, Again, there's stuff that I wouldn't necessarily want teenagers reading in my books, but
Sure.
I don't know. I play around a lot with teenagers and adults, both being very prominent in my works. So, yeah, I do like that age a lot.
I love that. I think some authors are a little bit leery of stepping into teenage main characters, or casts of teenage characters, or young teen characters even, because they're worried that it'll automatically pull their work into YA, and that's not the case. And I think you do a great job of bringing that magical kind of time of life into an adult fiction book, which is fantastic. I think I think a lot of the readers, and a lot of the writers out there, frankly, that would dive into your books as readers would find that same kind of, like, I resonated with what you were doing with those characters. Like, I could feel my own teenage experiences in those books. It was really a good way to kind of step back into that a little bit and be able to relate to the characters in a way that maybe I don't relate to all other adult characters, because I think there is some kind of like solidarity built around that teen, that adolescent experience. It's just like you said, it's so foundational. It's such a key part of developing who we are. Okay, so Strings is a family,
Mhm.
right? Before and Strings comes out in August, like we had mentioned, and this so guys, by the time you're hearing this, we're going to be close to the launch date. You're going to have to go out and get freaking Strings. But right now, we can get our hands on a couple of other things. One of them being Sublime Messages, which came out in February. So, can you talk a little bit about Sublime Messages and what's that story about?
Yeah, so Sublime Messages is another one that I went so many different places than I had anticipated. And it's one that involves a lot of twists and turns. So I don't want to give too much away. Um, what is Sublime Messages? It starts out being kind of, well, involving a hostage situation. On a surface level, there's a high school where some cult like people kind of go into the high school and take over, and they don't express what they want. They're just, they took over, and nobody can figure out what they're doing in there. And so a profiler, a woman, is tasked with looking into the cult leader's background to see if she can figure out what this guy wants, why he's doing this. And in doing so, she finds well, opens up a hornet's nest of all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's so much that goes on in
Gotcha.
this book. I will say it bends sci-fi.
Oh,
So as far as the horror goes, there's some sci-fi stuff in there, maybe a little time play. So again, I don't want to give too much away. There's also some flashbacks that involve past present. So if you're reading Kitty, you said,
yeah.
Lucas, and so
Mhm.
a few of my books deal with past present, where and just kind of going back to adolescence. One of the things that I do a lot is look at how adolescence kind of reflects the adult that the person became, or how it's still like the things that happened in one's youth
Mhm.
affect the adult the person became. And so I play a lot with past present versions of people. So Sublime Messages is another book that does that. And there's like a really
Okay.
obsessive crush, there's a cult, a monster. I don't want to get too much more into that, but
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
it seems to be well received. The people that have read it, not many have read it yet, but everyone that has just seemed to really enjoy it. So I'd love more feedback.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to pick that. I think I may have already picked that one up. If not, I'm going to grab it because that sounds fascinating. I love the past, present. I mean, you're dealing with the same person, but in two drastically different periods of life. And, you know, I think there's so much that you could do with that type of character or characters in a story with high stakes like this. And I don't know because I haven't read it yet, but the ability for a character to be to be reflective while also telling the story about what had happened. That's a pretty powerful, that's a pretty powerful thing to have your hands on the steering wheel of while you're writing a story.
And honestly, it was the first time I brought in time as an element. And whew, when you open that Pandora's box, like playing with time gets so confusing.
Yeah.
So that book was a bear to edit, but I was pleased with the end result. But I don't know if I'll play with time like that again.
Right.
It was hard.
Did you do
But
timeline? Like, did you plot?
no, I am so bad at note taking. You wouldn't want to see my notes. They're terrible. Like it's so bad. I'm my own worst student. I mean, really, I'm so bad. My notes are the worst. But I just, like I said, I pantsed it and then it worked out. But
Perfect.
time play is weird, so I
Yeah.
don't know if I recommend it.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I always joke around and say I could write a novella or a novel, and the reality is the whole story will probably take place in a matter of weeks. Like,
Yeah.
and it's linear, and that's kind of like my safe space right now is just going from moment to moment when I'm writing. But one day I will play with that a bit. In fact, when I was writing Bury the Child, I had a couple of periods of flashback, and my editor was like, get rid of him.
I
Because,
love flashbacks.
yeah, he was like, you're confusing me, and I'm your editor. And I was like, okay. So I had to kind of reorganize some things, and it even became a problem for the series of titles in the Whispering House series because I was going to have one book take place in one time period and then flash back in the next book.
Oh yeah.
So to kind of tell the story about what had happened before that, and in reorganizing the books and kind of managing the whole series, I decided to just go linear with it to reduce a little bit of the. So I had to fight my temptation to do some time jumping, which is what I really wanted to do at first, but now I'm grateful that I didn't. My last book in that series does go back. It goes way back. So I have to say that with an asterisk. The last book in the series occurs before the rest of them.
Oh, okay. Well, see, and I'm waiting for that one. So.
Yeah, you'll see that one. That one's gonna. Well, hopefully you're not mad at me when you read "Bless the Mother" because there's a twist in there that.
I'm not mad at you for both of them, but I still like them. I mean, I get mad at you, but then I'm like, oh, it was really good. So I just have to do you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, so we've talked about the themes of adolescence, or the theme of adolescence, and I love that you keep coming back to that. We spoke briefly about other themes that are prominent in people's writing. Like for me, grief horror is pretty prominent in what I write. For you, you've got this great understanding and ability to craft and manage adolescent characters. And I think that's really unique. I mean, I just did an interview with Casey Griffin last week. Not last week, it was a couple weeks ago now. And she writes Weird West horror, which I love. And I love that she's so committed to that world, which is just wild, right? It's just, I was watching a panel at StokerCon that she was on about Weird West horror, and I was like, I wanted to like raise my hand every 5 seconds, like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? Because if you spend time in the desert, you realize how magical and different that place is. It can be hard for some people, I think, to relate to that if they've never been out there. They can get it, but they don't really fully understand when someone says to see the sky at night in the desert is a unique thing. They can imagine part of that if they haven't experienced it. But everyone that's reading your books has experienced adolescence. And we've all experienced maybe in different ways, but also in very similar ways because the process of growing up doesn't necessarily change our experiences do. So do you feel like this is a part of your writing that you just love to hold on to it and you can't wait to do more of it? Or is it one of those things where you're like, yeah, eventually I'll probably move into another area of primary theme? Or have you ever thought about that? Am I just bringing something up for the first time?
Yeah, no, you kind of are. So thanks. I think it just is there because that's what I like to write.
Mhm.
And also because, like I said, I'm around teenagers all the time.
Right.
For better or worse, I can't get away from them. And I love them and I hate them, but no, I mean, they're my life,
Yeah.
especially that 15, 16-year-old, I mean, they teach me new slang, they teach me all kinds of things about life. So anyway, so I maybe someday when I stop teaching,
Mhm.
my brain will go elsewhere. But there's such a huge part of my life that I think I don't know if I could escape that subject in my writing. That's
Mm.
part of what drives me to write.
I see. I
So
love that.
yeah.
I love that because I think that that inspiration just comes naturally through our experiences, right? Like
Mhm.
our current experiences as writers. I feel like that's prevalent for readers as well. Their current experiences when they see that or hear that in the books they read or the shows they see, there's some connection there that really kind of pulls them further into the story. And I feel like that's a really strong way to immediately connect with a reader. For me, it's that magic. Like as soon as you start like going through that, I can see the whole thing and I can feel like I'm back. Kind of put my age on report here a little bit. I'm like back in the early '90s as a teenager,
Yep.
going,
Yep.
"This is cool," right? Okay. Although none of the things that happened in Kitty happened to me as a teenager, thank God.
Yeah, well, Kitty's a bit more Mean Girls, so you probably didn't experience that, personally. So
Yeah.
that was a little more of, and Kitty is a bit more personal to me and some of the things I experienced, with some of the Mean Girl behavior and stuff. So
So
yeah.
that was, I mean, for those that haven't read the book yet, there's a group of teenage girls, and there's the dynamics of the different personalities and power structures in that group. That is a prevalent part of your story, although it's not the story,
Mhm.
right? So I think that for 40 something year old dudes can read this book and still feel completely immersed in it. That's a credit to your storytelling.
I'm happy to hear it.
Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, we've mentioned Kitty a few times. We should probably talk about what it's about. Could you talk a little bit about Kitty?
Yeah, so it's a little hard sometimes to work backwards, because
Yeah.
your mind gets so immersed in what the
Yes.
current work is. But um, Kitty, it's a poltergeist story, so that's not, I'm not spoiling anything with that. It's pretty obvious from the get-go. But yeah, it combines poltergeist, Mean Girls, kind of a bunch of stuff going on there, and I, yeah, I don't even, I kind of forget how to talk about Kitty a little bit.
No, it's great.
And yeah, so what is Kitty anymore? Again, so it involves some girls turned to women and something they did when they were young has essentially come back to haunt them now that they're adults,
Mhm.
and their own children are sort of experiencing troubles and difficulties, and they have to kind of come back together to deal with this thing. Um, and in doing so, well, all hell breaks loose, essentially. So, yeah, that's basically what it is. And a lot of, as I mentioned, not everything, this is not like a true story, or a lot of the things in the book are not necessarily what I personally experienced, but just
Right.
what I remember of girlhood, girls I knew. I have five sisters. And so just in speaking
Wow.
with them and their experiences, we went to small private schools, and some of that
Yeah.
infighting and nastiness and all of that, very insular kind of behavior. Yeah, so I tried to pull in a lot of that. There's also this interesting, I think the reason I wrote this book to begin with was I had read something somewhere about, well, the movie Poltergeist, actually, when I was a kid, that franchise haunted my dreams. Like, I think I saw them in fifth grade, and those affected me so much. Like, if you ask me what horror movies affected me as a child, Poltergeist, 100%. Even now, I showed them to my own kids, and they thought they were so dumb. But watching them as an adult, they still terrified me just because they brought back those memories.
They thought they were dumb?
Oh yeah, they're like, these are the dumbest movies. The special effects are terrible. Well, because they are, they're so bad, you know. But there's something about the original, particularly. Anyway, I read something
Yeah.
about how there's this idea that poltergeists, the spirit of whatever, is a manifestation of, pre or like an adolescent girl's angst, like that. Those things manifest poltergeist, the girl's
Mm,
angst. So that birthed, Kitty and the idea and all that. So anyway,
nice.
I did some research on that. It fascinated me. So
That is fascinating. Now I'm kind of seeing it through just a slightly different colored lens. I love that. Um,
yeah,
I mean, I think the first thing that caught me about Kitty was I was like, I saw the cover and I was like, ooh, that's fun. And I was thinking psychological thriller, like horror or something. And then I got into the story and I was like, oh, this is definitely, now I see the influence that Poltergeist had on you, coming
mhm.
to fruition in that story. But for the record, Poltergeist was terrifying. I know your kids and
Thank
my kids,
you, thank you.
yeah, your kids and my kids have the similar taste in the
They're
special
jaded.
effects. Yeah. I mean, that that first one was just so good.
Yes, it
Um,
was. It still is.
and the dude from Poltergeist, the old guy, he,
Kane, whatever. Yeah.
yeah, God, he just messed. He was like stuck in my brain.
Yeah, he's still in my brain. I can't get him out. We used
Yeah,
to play. These other girls and I would play Kane on the playground. Like he'd be the bad guy, and we'd be trying to get away. I mean, I'm not kidding you. This really affected my childhood
it's awesome.
deeply.
I mean,
Oh,
his accent, his look, everything was perfect.
yeah. Mhm.
I don't know if you're a metalhead, but the band Anthrax did an album called Among the Living.
I know who Anthrax is, but I have
Yeah.
not heard the band or the album. But I should listen to it. Does it relate to?
If you go look at the cover of Among the Living, you'll be like, "Oh, it's the dude from Poltergeist."
I'm
Like they were,
definitely do it.
yeah, they were really big about pulling things like that into their music, kind of like cultural references and things like that. Pretty sweet. I think the other character that really just never left me was Zelda, the sister from Pet Cemetery.
I haven't seen Pet Cemetery. I know, right? Shame on me.
Now you will miss a little bit of the magic because, to your kid's point about the effects and quality uh, of film and all the things that we had in the late 80s, early 90s. That character terrified me back then. I think part of it was because it was kind of grainy and you didn't catch all the little details, and we didn't have like a lot of reference. These kids today have all this reference. It's totally different deal. But man, when I saw her and I was probably, I don't know, 12, I was like, the rest of this movie is not scary anymore. Like he was terrifying.
I have to
Um,
watch it now.
yeah, which by the way, um, if you watch that, you will definitely be like, oh, okay, now I know why this dude was so influenced by grief and horror. Because essentially the question to be asked in Pet Cemetery is if you lose somebody that you love more than anything in the world, is it better to let them be gone than to have them
Mhm.
back? In fact, I think one of the most famous lines from the movie is like sometimes dead is better.
I,
Yeah,
I think I've heard the line. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. Okay, so well, that's obviously Stephen King. What kind of influence? I mean, I was big into horror growing up. I mean, you and I are very similar in the fact that we've been readers and writers like since we can remember, and just in love with the art that is. I don't just use the word literature because some people are like, that's not literature, that's whatever, dude. But like if you think about your early influences, what kind of got you into loving and writing horror?
Yeah. So that's actually a really hard question because I don't tend to read horror and I never
Mhm.
have. The only horror that I actually read is my fellow indie authors. I really try to support the community. So that's how I met you. Is
Yeah,
reading your fabulous work, and I try
yeah,
to
Thank you.
reach out and meet and support other authors in the community. But and I recently have purchased some Stephen King novels, but I have yet to read them. I mean, it's terrible. I sound
Oh,
like
wow.
an apostate or something.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, growing up, I read pretty traditional stuff like Chronicles of Narnia, and my favorite was the Chronicles of Prydain, which were it was a Welsh, some Welsh novels. And I read a lot of fairy tales. I loved Grimm's fairy tales and fables, and I don't know, some I can't even remember a bunch of stuff I read as
Yeah.
a kid. And then high school, I don't honestly, I don't know what I read. I know I read, but it was not horror, definitely not horror. And even in my younger adult years, all the way up through recently, the stuff that I read is like classic literature. I mean,
Yeah.
as snooty as that sounds, like I read Dante's Inferno is one of my favorites. I love Oscar Wilde, and I read a lot of like old epics and junk like that. I mean, like old stuff. That's because it's my profession. I mean,
Yeah.
I teach literature, so I'm reading a lot of
Mhm.
that stuff. I'm really weak in contemporary fiction, so I've been trying to read more
Mhm.
contemporary work based on recommendations from friends and peers. So I'm trying, but I actually had to really think about this because I thought, oh, if you interview me and ask me what my influences are, what have I read I don't know. I had so my what got me into writing horror, I think, is even if I look at the literature, the classic works that I read, I've always liked the macabre stuff. So
Mm.
Grimm's fairy tales, the dark ones, where
Yeah.
there's cannibalism and incest, yes, whatever. Like that's the stuff that fascinated me. Or the gothic fiction, Dorian Gray and Dracula, or Dante, the one about hell, Paradise and Purgatory are boring. I always liked the darker stuff.
Yeah.
So all that classic literature, yes, but the dark. Shakespeare, he's okay. I love Macbeth. The rest
Oh,
are just okay to me. I like the witches and the beheadings and that stuff. So it's the darker side of literature that's always fascinated me. And I guess that's the horror that I'm into.
yeah. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, the most impactful part of that story to me, obviously, is what is most impactful to most readers. It's just like this tremendous loss at the end. In,
Yes.
in the name of love.
I used
Uh,
to snap those kids, actually. That one always annoys me. I actually don't care for Romeo and Juliet, but that's because I'm around teenagers too much. And I don't want to hear about you know,
yeah.
get it together, kids.
But
But
I just felt like it was so like that story wouldn't have nearly the impact if those two haven't died the way they
oh, of
do.
course, if they'd had a
You know?
happy ending or something.
Yeah, that's horror, man. I mean, think
Yeah.
about that from like a parent's perspective. Also, I can tell that you are a huge fan of the classics when I read your work. Not that it's written in the same voice as classic literature. You're not trying to write like that, but you have a very beautiful way of writing, even
Oh, thank
the
you.
contemporary horror. It I can feel that classical influence on your writing, and it's beautiful. I was telling you before we came live just how much I really enjoy your voice as a writer. It's it's artistic and it's clean and it's contemporary and it's classical. It's like very well balanced. It's a very there's a lot of flavor in what you write. It was funny because I was, when you read someone's writing, but you haven't, and you've kind of met them a little bit before you read their writing, I think you come with these like biases and preconceived notions of what you could possibly be getting yourself into. It just did such a great, like I had such a great experience, uh, like hearing your voice as a writer. I was like, oh, I can't wait to read so much more because it was just such a great place to be. So, huge props on the classical influence. I think, by the way, a lot of us kind of came up that way, at least in the beginning, because I feel like there was like this hesitation to let young people read modern horror.
Yeah.
But then they would put something like A Tale of Two Cities in front of you. You know? It's like one of the most impactful things I ever read. I read it every couple years.
Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
love Tale of Two Cities.
yeah, some people hate Dickens and some people love him. I just love that story. I mean, it's
Oh yeah.
just incredible. And then I think I was talking to someone on social, it might even been on Threads or something the other day about like, you know, there's this like just this layer of death on everything. If you're a horror reader and you're a fan of the classics, it's hard to not enjoy that angle of those stories. Poe, obviously, uh,
Obviously, yes.
you know, I wasn't. I don't think I've ever read Dracula. You know,
Yeah, I finally got around to it a couple years ago. Yeah.
did you?
But, hmm
I've never read it. It floors people when I tell them that. I'm like, I just haven't. So yeah, no harm, no foul on that. I think as far as modern horror goes, Dean Koontz and Stephen King were kind of like the two biggest voices in my life until I discovered Anne Rice.
hmm
And then I started reading Anne Rice, and she was just so deep. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what century I'm in right now because it's like this character building a whole family. We're going to build a whole family's worth of characters right now. And it was hard for me as I think a young teen to kind of have the patience to sit in some of that. But I just loved the beauty of the world she'd built. It was so flavorful and deep, and there was like all this great, like, just she. I mean, could anyone else write about New Orleans like Anne Rice? It's crazy. So anyway, so outside of the YA and middle grade experience as a younger writer, I could say, right? Like, does that make sense? As an earlier writer, did you ever play with anything like poetry or anything? I mean, your classical influence makes me believe you probably did. Am I correct in that
Oh
assumption? Or
yeah, yeah. No, I also write a lot of poetry. I actually, it's funny. I went through about 10 years in my life where I stopped writing novels,
oh,
and because life just kind of got away from me. I actually was kind of sad. I thought novels are. I guess I'm done, and I wrote a ton of poetry in that 8 to 10 years of my life. So
oh wow.
I also have currently two anthologies of poetry out, and I'm working on another right now. Poetry is like a totally different brain. I feel like when I write poetry, I have to be a different person, and I don't know. I during that time when I wrote a ton of poetry, I was in it. I was doing so well. Nowadays, I have to like slow down and put my brain to it. It's not as easy. It's strange. It's like I became a different person when I was writing poetry. But yeah, it's a totally different process, and I think a lot more about words than I do. Um, that sounds strange, doesn't it? I think a
No, it's
lot
true.
more about the phraseology and this,
Hmm.
like the thesaurus is always open and the rhymezone.com is always open. I'm like, it's very different. But yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a long explanation.
No,
You write poetry.
that absolutely that jives with my own experience with when I was younger, I wrote a lot more poetry. In fact, I haven't written poetry in years, but I wrote a lot of poetry when I was an adolescent, and I felt like it was I think a part of it was because it was just so close to songwriting and I was in music so much. And
Mhm.
I think I may have been at that point, I probably would have been intimidated by trying to write long fiction, whether it be a novella or a novel. So I think short stories and poetry were kind of like my comfort zone when I was a younger writer. And I think that just hearing you talk about your affection for classic literature just automatically is, threw me into maybe the assumption that you have a fond feeling for poetry as well, and that you may have the gift for writing poetry. Because to your point, I mean, like poetry is a completely different animal. And
Sure.
I interviewed Mike Allen a couple months ago. Mike is a fantastic poet. And he was blowing me away when he was talking about his poetry. He's like, "Yeah, I did all his poetry," and it was like so successful at poetry. And I'm like, "Really? I just am not exposed to that side of the profession, right? I just don't." Outside of writing it and keeping it kind of close to the vest, I never released any of my poetry. And so now I look back on it and I crack up because I was a teenager and it's ridiculous. But it's like, dude, could you have been any more angsty? Like,
Oh yeah, no, my teenage poetry was probably terrible.
yeah.
I don't know how when people get up and do poetry slams and spoken word, that is a whole other thing. I would never read my poetry out loud. That is always impressive to me. That's like something entirely different. And To short stories, I don't know how you guys do short stories. That's one thing I cannot do for the life of me. So I can do short, I can do long, but cannot do the short story. So it's funny how we all have our things, you know? So,
Yeah, I think it comes up a lot when I interview people about collections because they'll put a collection together. I mean, just talking about Casey Griffin, she just putting a collection out now, and it's really good.
mhm.
But I was commenting to her on sometimes when you read a collection, you feel like you're kind of jumping around time with the author because they've collected these short stories over all these years. For me, I can't jump between long fiction and short fiction very easily. So to kind of like to your point about like writing poetry or not writing poetry, like I'm either writing long fiction or I'm not. I have to like go reprogram my brain to do short fiction. Writing anything short right now would be very difficult for me. And I used to write short stories exclusively. I just never published any of them or did anything with them, and I still have a whole folder, yeah, like a three-ring binder full of them. Maybe one day I'll break them out and actually do something with them. But I noticed that when I was looking through your list of titles, that you do the long fiction game, and I think that's great. You have a trilogy, No Future, right?
Right. Yep.
You have a couple of series,
Two
right? So you
trilogies. Yep.
Yep. So, and then the I'm gonna butcher this. Is it Tir Nanog? Is that right?
Tiernanog. It's, yeah, just, it's not too hard. I might be butchering it too, you know, to be honest with
And that's another trilogy.
you. Right.
So
Right.
those two. Do you have other series or are those?
No, those are the only two. I don't intend to have any more series. I really like the one and dones, you know, but
Okay.
those were two YA trilogies that just kind of came out of nowhere during COVID. I mean, I'm not kidding.
Oh.
I think they just, in fact, I would say so. Those two trilogies pulled me back into writing because prior to those, I had had my like 10-year hiatus where I wrote nothing but poetry. And then
Mhm.
once COVID hit, oh my, I was home. I was trying to teach online and just deal with everything. And I was like, I need an outlet. And so I just knocked out 6 books in like 2 years.
Wow.
And so that pulled me back into writing. And then yeah. So
Wow.
somehow that was like my green light to get back into it. Yeah.
Now those are horror.
No, those are young adult.
Young.
The first one is like kind of a crime thriller, sci-fi, and then the second one, I love Irish mythologies. That it had always been kind of a something I wanted to do was I wanted to delve into the Irish mythology a
Mhm.
little more beyond the leprechauns and all that, you know.
Yeah.
And I know it's really popular right now to do mythological retellings, but it's also kind of people are shying away from kind of Western mythology, which I understand why publishers want to do that. But I still wanted to do the Irish mythology because it's not very well known. There's actually 4 cycles of Irish mythology. A little history, a little lesson here. And so I chose the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology, which involves, oh, such great heroes and, you know, villains and all this stuff that a lot of people have never heard of. And so I put all that into like a young adult romantasy. I kind of modernized that.
Oh,
It was just a little passion project. So
nice.
had fun with that. And again, that got me through COVID. So
That's excellent.
yeah,
Um, I'm gonna have to share those with my daughter.
I hope
She's
so. That's
she's
really
an
my audience.
oh yeah, yeah. She's an obsessive reader. And she's part horror fan. I got her into Darcy Coates, and she's obsessed. And but she loves Holly Jackson, so it's like the whole murder mystery kind of teen scene that she's in right now. But she would love that. I always tell her use different genres and subgenres of fiction related to what you like to read to help be a palate cleanser for the things that you read all the time, right? So,
Right, right.
like, I like some. I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, but I love thrillers, and I do like a good sci-fi thriller. And I love folk inspired
Mm-hmm.
horror adjacent work. Folk horror is fantastic.
Ooh, I wrote a folk horror. It tends to be
Which one?
well liked. The Women in the Woods.
Oh, so the Women in the Woods is folk horror? I didn't know
Oh
that.
yes. Ah, yeah. I
Oh,
wanted to try my hand at that. I've been trying. Like after I did those trilogies, I was like, I want to write horror. I don't know. I had some nasty stuff go down at work that totally made me angry, and that's how I started writing horror. It was like I needed to get some anger out, and then I found my niche, and I just kept going. So, anyway, So I was like,
Well,
I did a cosmic horror and then a folk horror and a sci-fi horror. I mean, I've just been trying the genres really. So,
nice. Maybe the Weird Western's coming out soon.
oh well, I don't know. If, I think I leave the westerns to the person you interviewed.
Yeah, Casey, she's
Yes,
fantastic.
I don't know if the westerns for me, but you know,
Yeah, you know what's one of the things that I like about what she's doing and some of the other more modern writers that are exploring some of these subgenres a little bit more to kind of breathe some new life into them. And you may have done this intentionally or not intentionally with the Women in the Woods is sometimes they try to kind of alter the perspective of those subgenres a little bit. Like one of the things that Casey said about the typical Western is like, look at all the women characters. They're either damsels in distress or they're prostitutes. She's like, no, I want this main character to be the hero.
yeah, I
She's
love that.
yeah, she's like the badass. And she's neither of those two things. So yeah, I feel like playing with some of these subgenres in a way where you can breathe some new perspective or life into them is really exciting. I think my go-to for folk horror is got to be Stephanie Ellis. I just
I don't know.
I
See, I
love
need
her
to find
stuff.
out more about. I do need to read more horror. I do feel like
Right.
I need to get
I'll
more into the reading. So for sure.
I'll drag you into that world. You'll love it. Into the Stephanie Ellis world of writing. She's also selfishly, I've also conned her into being my proofreader on this
Oh, nice.
series, the Whispering House series. So if you like the proofing that was done on Burn the Girls, we can thank Stephanie Ellis for you guys not seeing the same word over and over and over again in, in the same
No, there was nothing wrong with it. So it's
so
great.
she's fantastic. Okay, so before we kind of tie this one up, I wanted to ask you if there's anything that you're kind of inspired by now. It doesn't have to necessarily be another artist or another book or whatever, but like what's kind of breathing the life into your world that you're kind of like wanting to share with other people right now that's not maybe not necessarily one of our own titles. Is there anything that's like if I told you you got to recommend a book to me right now, like what would you slide across the table to me? Like right there.
Oh, yeah, so I won't give you Dante. Don't worry about it. Even though Dante's my favorite, Oscar. I wouldn't recommend. I'm just personally, I've enjoyed over the last year or so reading so many great indie authors.
Mm,
Just it amazes me the incredible minds and just the creative talent that's out there that is
mm.
so under recognized. I mean, your work absolutely.
Thank you.
One of my favorite writers I found is a guy named Mike Young, and I actually started promoting my work first on Wattpad, and I know a lot of people kind of put up their nose at Wattpad, like, oh,
Ah,
Wattpad, it's all just for like fanfics. But that's where I really gained my own confidence was putting stuff on Wattpad, and that's where I put all my works in progress as I get them written. And I met Mike Young on Wattpad, and he puts his stuff on there, and he's been putting his stuff on Amazon, and he's a phenomenal writer. He just put out his first novel, Torchlight, on Amazon.
okay.
It's huge, it's thick, it's like a Stephen King novel, and he's just got a ton of ideas. Never ceases to surprise me. So that was I strongly recommend his work.
Okay.
Um, and another really fun book I recently read, not horror, but really just kind of a really curious book, but made me think a lot, was by a friend of mine named Jonathan Gable. Also on Amazon, it's a book called Private Destiny. Just kind of made me question life. It's just about a guy who goes through life and kind of thinks he's trying to solve mysteries, but also is kind of in this paranoid state, dealing
Mm,
with some drug addiction and all kinds of other
wow.
situations. But the writing was really well done and kind of beautiful, and just really made me think. You ever read one of
Mm.
those books where you're like, I don't
Oh yeah.
like the story itself is kind of interesting, but it's more just what did it do to my brain? Like
Oh yeah.
that. It made me think about stuff. So just a
Yeah.
couple hidden gems I found recently, for sure.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the redemption of Morgan Bright from Chris Panettiere really kind of opened my mind to a element of the treatment of women in the medical
Oh,
profession.
right. Yeah.
so many years ago that I never considered. It was a real thinker for me. I was like, wow, this stuff really happened? Like it's crazy. So yeah, I'm with you. Like sometimes you'll read a book where it's not so much that the story was this dominant thing that kind of sticks with you. It's more of the concepts and the theories and the thinking and the elements of the story that kind of pull you in directions that you maybe didn't expect, and it kind of sticks with you a little bit. Like Zelda from Pet Cemetery.
And Kane from Poltergeist, you know. Whew. That is it's a mark on you.
No, that's great. I'll look those up, and yeah, I'm happy you mentioned Wattpad, because I write serial. I release my novels as serial episodes before I publish them in final proofread print, ebook, or whatever, and an audiobook. I put them out in serial episodes first. They're post one round of edit, pre second round edit, and proofreading. So they're they're cleaned up and they're happy and they're exactly what you're going to get in the finished product, minus a little polish and some things. But there's no major changes in my books, because I do the plotting beforehand, so I can kind of play with that a little bit. As someone who writes, so you did serial releases. Do you do that after you run your editing?
No. So yeah, no, I use Wattpad for my works in progress. I just post a chapter as I write it. And I think I love it because it keeps me beholden to a timeline every 3 to 5 days. And even if I'm like right now, my whole strings draft is on there.
Wow.
It needs all the editing, but it's just kind of cool that it's there. And there are people that do read it.
Yep.
And they know it's a draft, but it makes me feel responsible. Like I might have an audience. This has to be decent. And I better keep on schedule. Right. So for me, it just is like a not a drafting board, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's my play zone where it keeps me sticking to to my schedule and everything. Right. If it was just sitting in my Google Drive, I don't think I'd have the motivation to be so scheduled with it.
Right.
No.
Well, there you go. So if you guys are on Wattpad,
you can read the terrible draft. I would not recommend it. I wait until August, but you can read it. It's there free. You know.
Well, I mean,
actually, all my other books are on there too for free. You could read any of them for free on there. So.
Oh wow! So you leave them up.
Oh yeah.
Up there.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And now when you put your books in Amazon, you do not use Kindle Unlimited, right? Kindle KDP Select.
No, I don't.
Okay. So for those that are listening, if you're wondering about having your works on a separate site like that, if you're in KDP, it's fine. You just can't be in KDP Select.
Right.
And offering those in the other platforms. That's been something I've had to manage, where I release all my episodes and I'm like sending out the flares like, hey guys, I have to pull these down. And it's only for that one reason. Otherwise I would also leave them up. So, excellent. So, well, thank you so much, Sarah, for meeting with us. And this has been so fascinating for me. And I've been trying to get together with you so much because, much like you, I'm so entrenched in reading indie authors, and you and I have just gotten along so well on socials, and I love everything you're producing. I love that your stories are thinkers. They're beautifully written. They're professional. Like, the quality of your writing is outstanding. And I just love how consistently awesome you are to other authors, and how prolific you are in the production of your own work. I mean, it's motivational to me, because there's times, in every writer's day where they're like, oh, I've got X amount I've got to do today. And you look around and you can see the other authors around you that are inspirational and pushing in ways that maybe, you might be in a shortfall or something that day. And I'm like, all right, I just got the Instagram reel from SQ McGrath. I've got to get on my game. I don't have a post today.
Oh, well, so, yes, very busy. I got to stay busy. That's just the kind of brain I have, right?
Right. Well, you guys go check out her website. It's sqmcgrath.com.
Yep.
All of your books are listed there. Your Amazon profile, author profile, is built out, so they can go find your stuff there as well. We're going to nerd out at a later date and time about strings. Once it's out, maybe we can do a little episode where we can talk about that one in greater detail once the world has had a chance to read it, because I can't wait to see it. I've seen. So for those that don't know, you put three potential covers up and let people vote on which cover they wanted.
I couldn't decide. So
Loved that. And I was torn between B and C, for the record, if anyone's going to watch this later and go back and check your Instagram. But I think C took
I
the
think
bill
it's the
for me.
winner. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, and we will see you in the next episode.